Alright, it's kind of late at night, but we finally had enough time to analyze this, and I wanted to get it on it early rather than waiting for a full week later before releasing my power rankings. So we are going to be talking about Imola, and yeah, without much further ado, let's just kind of get right into it. All right. So obviously I've got these three drivers highlighted, and we are going to be starting with our guys at the bottom. Well, we're going to start with the guy who we have not ranked, being Alex Albon, since he kind of DNF'd through something that wasn't really his fault. It was more or less the team's fault, and compared to the sprint weekends, we don't really have enough competitive sessions. That one session is enough to be like, I probably shouldn't include him within this week's rankings. So I'm not going to. And yeah, but let's get into it. So we're going to start at the bottom. We got Alex Albon there. We're going to kind of more or less skip past him. Into my other bottom drivers of this weekend, we've got Fernando Alonso with an absolutely astonishingly bad weekend. I don't know if during the race what the heck happened to him that he had to do another stop very late on, if he was having some issues, but it was just a bad weekend from Fernando. Crashed in what was it, FP3, out in just out in qualifying. I think he got the timing wrong or something like that. Just could not get the time, like the lap times when he needed it. Had to start from the pit lane. Wasn't even really able to do anything during the race either. And then just did a fast lap at the end. It was just a very, very, very bad weekend from Fernando. After that, Logan Sargent. This was another very, very bad weekend for him. There's just nothing really going to show for it. I think he had it. If I'm remembering right, I want to say he was like P16 or P17. Like, it wasn't the worst qualifying performance he ever had, but then he was just absolutely nowhere again during the race. Next group of drivers who I put on my drivers that needed to actually improve. I've put Perez, Magnussen, Zhou, Ricardo, Gasly, and Bottas. So, with Perez, he got out-qualified by both RB drivers this week. And then, while I don't think Ricardo necessarily outperformed him, Tsunoda definitely did. And this is a very, very, very bad drive from Perez, when the expectant position is to be competing for a front row, to be competing for P2 and arguably the win since you're in the top car, to be was he got a couple points? It's just no, that's just awful. That's just awful. A few more weekends like this, he's getting announced as being replaced. Kevin Magnussen, quite a big turnaround, but still not a great performance out of him whatsoever. It's quite a big turnaround simply because he set the bar so freaking low last week in the last race weekend in Miami, that this is actually quite a large improvement. It's insane to think about. But this is a car that should be competing for the bottom side of points, and he just isn't really there. Zhou Guanyu, doing actually better than expected, but still not enough to necessarily guarantee him a seat for next year. Daniel Ricciardo, good qualifying performance, I gotta say. Did pretty good job to get themselves into P9, but just absolutely did not have the race pace. Pierre Gasly, not much really to say to it. It's just getting outperformed by Ocon still. He's gonna have a tough time finding a seat maybe for next year at this point. P17, Valtteri Bottas. He's kind of in the same position as Gasly. I've heard rumors that he's talking to Alpine as well as Williams, and I can see him getting a seat. Absolutely, I can see him getting a seat next year. But does he deserve a seat next year? I don't know. I don't know at this point. I feel like his time should be done. And then the next group of drivers who I put in my midfield drivers of this week, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, and Ocon. I think absolutely, they basically did as expected in my opinion. I would say that might be a little underwhelming for Hulkenberg in my opinion. I think they have a car that could have been more competitive, but I think he's a midfield-worthy driver, so I think he put in a midfield-worthy performance. He basically is doing as is expected of him, in my opinion. Esteban Ocon, to be a midfield drive right now, that's pretty good for him. that's absolutely doing everything he can to get himself an outside shot at maybe a look at that Mercedes seat. And then Yuki Tsunoda, this was actually a pretty good weekend from him. The qualifying looked amazing, especially Q1 and Q2. It didn't quite live up in Q3, and then he had a bad start to the race. Made up for it a bit, but a bad start to the race kind of hindered him a little bit from being maybe higher up on this list. And then we got my drivers who I considered great for this weekend, but not quite championship level, is Leclerc. I put the Ferraris, I expected the Ferraris to be not as competitive as they were, and Leclerc outperformed my expectations. Oscar Piastri, he had himself a nice turnaround after some of the bad luck that he's had in other races. Granted, he didn't escape the bad luck in qualifying, having impeded Kevin Magnussen, but that's not 100% on him. His team does have to help him do better there. And then Lewis Hamilton, another good performance from him. He was good in Miami, he was good in Imola. And George Russell, bit better. He wasn't quite getting outperformed by some of the other cars that weren't necessarily expected to. I don't even remember the positions off the top of my head, but I just remember being so disappointed the last race weekend, because he got outperformed by Tsunoda, and I think Hulkenberg was right with him too. I don't even remember too well. Lance Stroll, this was an amazing weekend, basically outperformed Fernando Alonso in every aspect. More or less, he didn't crash the car, and Aston Martin wasn't necessarily expected to be competing for points, but Stroll managed to come away with 2 points, so this was a very good weekend from him, in my opinion. Carlos Sainz, this is a bit of an underwhelming performance. He seems to have really cooled off since the start of the season, but it's not a bad performance whatsoever. It's just not fantastic. This is still a pretty great performance. He's doing what needed to be done to, I think he finished P5 actually in the race. But yeah, one would hope for more, but it wasn't bad. And then, of course, at the top, I've got Verstappen and Lando Norris. I think Verstappen basically did everything they could. Red Bull was on the back foot the entire weekend. I think they were still expected, in my opinion, when I analyzed it, to be the top car. So it's not surprising he finished there, but ultimately, he still did the job. He got pole position. He led, I think, every single lap and was fast. So I can't really justify putting anyone above him. Lando Norris absolutely did pretty much perfect. I think if the team hadn't screwed up his strategy a little bit, I think the timing of his pit stop could have been better if he hadn't come out right behind Perez. Maybe he could have had a chance to chase down Max, but what if? Yeah, I don't need to repeat all of the things that Max said at the conference and the Italian or British Carbonara, whatever joke that he's ripping off of. But yeah, that is my rankings for this weekend. So of course, as always, we are going to do my race day awards. So driver of the day, worst driver, best recovery, over and under delivered. So in my driver of the day, I put once again Lando Norris. I think he got the absolute most of that card. Just overall fantastic weekend. Nothing that I can really fault to him outside of maybe qualifying getting outperformed by Piastri there. Worst driver of the day / weekend goes to Fernando Alonso. By far, this was an awful weekend from him. He needs to do better, especially considering he just signed a multi-year deal. Best recovery drive definitely goes to Oscar Piastri, in my opinion. He needed to have a little bit of luck going his way, and I think he did that. Driver that over-delivered this weekend goes to Lance Stroll. I don't think that car was expected to compete for points, so he managed to get it too. That's a very good performance. And then the driver that under-delivered, Sergio Perez. You're expected to be competing for a podium, and he wasn't even close. That was just simply awful. I don't think it was as bad as what Fernando Alonso was doing this weekend, but it was very bad. And then my pre-weekend quality predictions. You can see I put the Red Bulls out front, and then kind of a mix of the McLarens, Ferraris, and Mercedes in the group there. Then I had Alonso and Hulkenberg and Tsunoda. So some of it wasn't too far off, but of course, as always, some of them were very far off. So I got Verstappen and Norris in the exact right spots. I got Leclerc and Russell in the exact right spots. But Piastri outperformed expectations. Sainz outperformed expectations. So that would have meant, who would have dropped back? Oh, Perez. Perez was the big disappointment, as well as Alonso in qualifying. And then I'd say the RBs kind of shocked everyone to a degree. I think the Ferraris were better, in my opinion, than I thought pre-weekend, but after the practice sessions, analytically, I did put them higher. And yeah, there isn't really else too much to say as far as qualifying goes. And then my pre-weekend race predictions are kind of in the same vein. I had the Red Bulls, I had the McLarens next, I had basically the Mercedes and Ferraris tied after that, and then Alonso Hulkenberg. So when it came time for the actual performance, Perez, again, big disappointment. Same goes for Alonso. Those two were very disappointing this weekend, but it left room for some other drivers to have like good performances, such as Stroll, Zhou, Hamilton, Sainz, Leclerc, Norris. Basically, almost everyone exceeded expectations except for Perez and Alonso. Almost everyone else did like better than expected. And then we look at my actual weekly rankings, like predictions compared to the rest. So I did do better this time around than I did in Miami, but still not as good as the rounds previous to that. So anyways, let me know what you think of my rankings. Where am I way off? Who do you think should be higher? Who do you think should be lower? Who should be number one? Who should be last? Let me know. And thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.